Okay. I'm going to try to do this in just one take because I have things I need to do. But I'm going to make a request, and that is I'm going to tell you why this issue means so much to me and why it affects me. And if you're not willing to accept that at face value, and you're going to say whatever and then accuse me of harboring some kind of ill will towards a group of people or something like that, please save yourself the trouble, save me the trouble, and just don't go any further with this. I mean what I say, and I say what I mean. And up until today, the YouTube channel Polyphonic was one of my favorite video essay channels on YouTube. Some of the best commentary on modern music that you will ever hear, some of the most insightful commentaries, some of the most entertaining and well-presented commentaries, brilliant stuff. And then today they put up a video that is so vile and so despicable that it just nauseates me at the level of my soul. I'm not going to lie to you. This is why I bring up the point. This is why I bring up the thing that I'm not prevaricating. I'm not hiding. This is not a front for any deeply held prejudicial beliefs or anything. I'm going to be brutally honest with you about why I feel this way and why I feel so strongly about this. But first, let's get into what I'm talking about. So, Polyphonic is saying that this is Led Zeppelin month, and they're putting up video content about Led Zeppelin. And the first video, I actually have to absolutely agree with. They are right in the first video they made. The first video was about how Led Zeppelin ripped off a lot of artists. They stole riffs and melodies and songs, song ideas, and so many things from established artists, and they just passed it off as their own. That cannot be denied. Even the Led Zeppelin themselves acknowledge it. And we all know, for example, the controversy and the lawsuits around Stairway to Heaven and that sort of thing. I don't deny that at all. That is absolutely true. Led Zeppelin, it should be acknowledged that Led Zeppelin did that, and whether you enjoy the music or not, and I don't think it should diminish your enjoyment of the music, to simply be honest about that. So, that I have no problem with. Then they put up a video today about Led Zeppelin and cultural appropriation. I got out of arguments about things like this because it's agonizing. It's awful. It is just mind-numbing. My soul rots away dealing with the arguments around topics like these, cultural appropriation being outstanding among them. Okay. This argument was not anything I hadn't heard before. YouTube users have written in on previous videos I've done and made the exact same argument. Especially, I did one a while back called Rock Music Was Not Stolen from Blacks. I think that was the name of it. And there's a comment, should still be up on that video, that says literally what I'm about to articulate to you here. Literally what is articulated in the video, the Polyphonic video. Go watch it. Okay. The logic goes like this. White musicians stole rock and roll from blacks. That's the claim that's made. Okay, here is the logic. The stylistic origins of rock and roll are the end result of an ongoing evolution of Black American music that begins in the slavery era and progresses forward through the era of the Civil War, the Reconstruction, the racist post-Reconstruction South with Jim Crow and redlining and all of that, all the way up to rock and roll, the time of rock and roll. That musical legacy proceeds up to that point. that music very often features black artists expressing personal emotional pain. Expressing emotional pain of any kind, for themselves, for other people, that sort of thing. All the way up through the duration of everything that blacks as a group, African Americans as a group, have experienced. I don't like the expression African American or European American or anything like that, because it implies that we remain our continental origin instead of becoming fully American. But anyway, to make the point, the African American experience up to the creation of rock and roll. Okay. White people, this argument maintains, ought not to perform black music, or if they do perform black music, they are doing something that is a smack in the face to black people, an affront to black people, because they did not live through slavery, the Jim Crow South, redlining, the KKK, all of these things. They did not experience the pain that went into the creation of this music. Because they didn't experience that pain, for them to express pain, emotional pain, with rock and roll music is hypocritical and making a mockery of the black experience. Okay. There's a whole lot more bullshit in this video, but let me explain to you why that's bullshit. Pain and suffering are human universals. The reason that people of any ethnicity tap into things like blues and rock music to express pain is because their pain is something that they need to get out of them, and that music happens to be a good vehicle for it. Now, you might have a case if the totality of, and I know I sound sarcastic and condescending the way I'm talking right now, but it really is this ridiculous. You might have a case if the totality of rock and roll was music by black people created specifically for the purpose of articulating the pain of what it was like to experience slavery, the Klan, racism, Jim Crow, all of these things. That it was created for that and no other purpose. And then white people came along, took that music, and started playing it, and were literally up there singing songs about how they were personally victims of things they never experienced. Then you might have an argument. But that is not the totality of what rock and roll is as a style, as an art form. First of all, it's not just about suffering. There are a lot of other things that rock and roll music has been used to articulate, that it was used by blacks to articulate. Falling in love, having great sex, getting your heart broken, being pissed off at your boss, being annoyed, being happy, being sad. It covers a full spectrum of human emotion. And all of these feelings are things that everybody feels at some point. And to act like, because white people did not experience a very specific concept of oppression and degradation that occurred in this country, that they do not have their own emotions. And I say they because I struggle to count myself as part of any race. I just don't look at the world in these, I don't quantify myself in these terms. But anyway, just because they didn't experience that does not mean that they don't have things that they need to get out, that they need to cathartically purge or celebrate euphorically. Everybody has this need and this desire. You know, Mick Jagger singing, "I Can't Get No Satisfaction." Everybody has experienced this. Everybody has experienced the feeling of, fuck the world, I'm done with it. I just want to smoke a cigarette and not anybody bother me. That is a universal feeling. And it is not just because rock and roll has its origins with a race of people who experienced a particular variant of oppression and degradation and frustration and aggravation, all those things, does not mean that that's the only thing it's for. Rock and roll is for expressing, and just like all types of music, is for expressing human universals. We are all finding ways with art, all forms of art. We are all finding ways to articulate these undefinable feelings that bubble up inside us. That's why we have art, because we have to like rip this thing out and mold it into something and hold it up and say, look at that. That's what was in me. That's art. And to act like a whole bunch of styles of music are off limits to one race of people because you think that they don't suffer on the level that would warrant their participation in that genre is absurd. No one owes you an explanation for why they choose to take part in a particular art form. If they sincerely are moved to create in that art form, that is all that matters. And that's true for everybody across the board. I would have that same message to say to any racist white piece of shit who was trying to keep blacks out of genres of music commonly associated with white people. We need this. As a human species, we need this, an open, unadulterated access to express what we are feeling using the means that will best express it for us. If we don't have that as a species, if we are stifled in that, our souls begin to rot and die. So what's the next argument that they make? The next argument made in the video is that black artists early on could not find success among white audiences. You would have instances where white artists re-recorded music by black artists going on to a greater level of fame and fortune than the black artist who created it. The one that they love to cite, that's alluded to in this video, not in great detail, but is still alluded to, is the Pat Boone version of Little Richard's Tutti Frutti. Okay, first of all, getting back to my previous point about that white people aren't supposed to sing this music because it comes from cultural oppression they haven't experienced. Tutti Frutti is not about cultural oppression. It's about fucking lots of different women, which is also a human universal. Anyway, it's a really bad example because, get this, Little Richard died a multi-millionaire, having enjoyed the majority of his life with an extraordinary degree of wealth and affluence as a result of his musical career. And he is now remembered as an American cultural icon, as an American hero. He is celebrated universally. He is one of the most recognized and applauded contemporary musicians on the planet, along with those others that were mentioned, Chuck Berry and Ray Charles, and all of these people. They are now, they have gone on to fame and fortune, and they have lived very comfortable, very affluent lives and been culturally celebrated. However, in the case of Little Richard, Yes, Pat Boone's version of Tutti Frutti made more money because white people were willing to buy it and they weren't willing to buy the Little Richard version. Okay, first of all, from in the long-term standpoint, as far as recognition and sales, Pat Boone won the battle and lost the war because Little Richard's version is the only one we still listen to. I'm not aware of anyone that listens to Pat Boone's version outside of laughing at it. But anyway, it's difficult for me to look at Little Richard being a multimillionaire, and I don't have the numbers in front of me. A while back when this argument was originally put to me by a YouTube commenter, I went and looked it up, and it's something like, these are not the exact numbers, but it's something like Little Richard was worth $75 million when he died, and Pat Boone is currently worth $95 million or something like that. Okay, I can't feel sorry about a disparity of $20 million when this person is already living at the level of, say, $75 million. I don't consider that a great social injustice. I'm sorry. However, they eschew that. They ignore the fact that they're citing examples of this happening to artists that went on and were extraordinarily successful and culturally impactful, irrespective of that. And they point to, and then they allude to the fact that there were black artists who were not as successful as they could have been due to this. Okay, well, that's not wholly incorrect. The problem is just that we can't change the past. We can't go back to the 1950s and make everybody get with the program. It just doesn't work like that. Nothing has ever been perfect. Nothing ever will be perfect. The best thing we can do is try to do the best we can. So anyway, moving forward. It's difficult for these people to acknowledge, apparently, but artists like Pat Boone and Elvis Presley and artists like that doing a whiteified version of black early rock and roll helped white America embrace black music. It is in part what integrated the record sections. They talked in the video about how they used to refer to black music as race music and sell it separately from white music. White artists doing this music helped make it culturally acceptable. It helped get us to the point, I read, if you read Frank Zappa's autobiography, he talks about getting put in prison as a kid, a teenager. He got put in prison because he had booked a show for his rock band, and it was a multiracial or interracial band, had black and white members. They put him in jail. Hugh Hefner, when he did the Playboy TV show, would feature bands, live music artists that were integrated multi-ethnic bands. Drew huge criticism for that. Charles Schulz introduced one black character into his comic strip, and the world went into a tizzy. The idea of a multi-ethnic band is an afterthought now. Where is the great cultural opposition to multi-ethnic music ensembles? Where is it? It's not happening. Oh, I'm sure you can go dig up some racist, cracker-ass Peckerwood piece of shit that's going to complain about it. But that guy's going to be off in the minority. Meanwhile, multi-ethnic bands are everywhere. And nobody bats an eye, nobody thinks twice about it. Because we've moved forward. Okay. Then the video presents an op-ed that was written about the death of Jimi Hendrix. And it is so extraordinary because the op-ed presents this argument. And what's interesting is Polyphonic presents the argument and then hovers for a moment so that it's like we have to appreciate the profundity of what was said, and then kind of moves on like, oh, wasn't that brilliant? Even though what was said was purely opinion. And we're supposed to kind of accept it as fact, I think. I think that's what's going on. But they say this about the death of Jimi Hendrix. They say that the person who wrote the article says that the death of Jimi Hendrix was a sort of assassination attempt on the part of white people on some either conspiratorial level or cultural level. It's hard to describe exactly, but that what they did with the death of Jimi Hendrix, that was when white people were able to fully take over rock and roll music, and that the last great black rock and roll artist, they say, the last great black rock and roll artist was pushed away into obscurity to be remembered. I'm not kidding. Go watch this video. I'm not being sarcastic. As to be remembered as some sort of, they say, like a simpleton or something like that, or to be looked down upon and forgotten about and remembered as this kind of unimportant person or something like that. And I'm listening to this and I'm thinking, oh my God, you want me to believe that white people used the death of Jimi Hendrix to marginalize black musicians and are now remembering Jimi Hendrix, if at all, as some sort of novelty simpleton of unimportant renown? Okay, well, if that's true, you forgot to tell every guitar store I've ever been in. You forgot to tell every guitar magazine I've ever read. You forgot to tell every documentary that I've ever seen about Jimi Hendrix. You forgot to tell every music biographer that's ever written about Jimi Hendrix. You forgot to tell the Berklee College of Music that I graduated from you forgot to tell them that. You forgot to tell Julian Casper, who runs the Jimi Hendrix Lab and devoted his life to learning every single fucking note Jimi Hendrix ever played so that he can get up in front of a room full of students and replicate it perfectly. You forgot about Berklee. You forgot to tell Berklee's history of rock and roll class, because they sure didn't feel that way. You're going to have to explain to me how Jimi Hendrix, who is lauded as a god among men in the world of guitarists, who is remembered as a musical genius, who is celebrated over and over, an artist who now has the Experience Hendrix Museum, a traveling showcase of his guitars that travels the country and indeed the world for people to just bask in the glory of his guitars that are only special because he played them. You're gonna have to explain this to me. How on earth can you make such an asinine argument? How can you possibly think that carries any weight? You think that the music world has not been giving Jimi Hendrix his due? You're gonna have to explain that to literally every guitarist alive. Good Lord. Yes, sure. Jimi Hendrix is not being celebrated for his musical contributions, and Gutenberg is held in contempt by the literary world. Good Lord, man. How can you make such an idiotic argument? I mean, I made a reputation for myself over a decade ago as like an insult, kind of a YouTube insult comic type person. And so I don't want you, I've been since then very conscious about trying to present my arguments and my views in a constructive and beneficial way, but I am at a human loss for how any person can be so consumed by woke dogma that they would ever advance that notion about Jimi Hendrix, that white America snubbed him out of history. Okay, again, I don't know why he's pushing this argument specifically on Led Zeppelin, but he goes on to start criticizing Led Zeppelin about singing music that's based on the pain and suffering of experiences they never had. And, again, God, to me, that's like saying that, You can't perform in Hamlet unless your dad has been murdered by your uncle, or something like that, or you can't. I mean, I think I've articulated how stupid I think that is. Anyway, so he moves on to talking to a couple of people that are commentators on this matter, because he acknowledges that he's white and now he needs to turn the forum over to black people. And this is the problem. When we talk about individualism, again, it's not an issue of white people stealing rock and roll from black people. It's an issue of the collective stealing from individuals. Whether it's the black collective or the white collective trying to steal cultural accomplishments from a single person. That's the issue. Chuck Berry having, or Little Richard, or Ray Charles, or any of these having their work claimed by an entire race. That is the first theft that is happening. Just because, I got into this argument with a friend of mine, a guy I've known since junior high, way back in junior high, because on my Facebook page, I was complaining about, I heard Kendrick Lamar for the first time, and I thought it was terrible, and I was complaining about it. And he writes in and he says, you need to understand that we African Americans, we blacks, do not make music for you, a white person. We make it for ourselves. And when we put out music like this, we are doing it for this, and this reason. And he actually said that the reason the bass was so loud on this particular Kendrick Lamar song I was complaining about was, he said, because we find that to be soothing, and you as a white person would not understand that because it's something about my genetic makeup or something. I said, okay, first of all, imagine what your response would be if I told you that you were genetically incapable of appreciating a type of music. 2, you have never made, it's like, I know you. You have never made a music track in your life. You do data entry. You don't get to lay claim to an entire genre of music and just instantly decide that every artist that shares your ethnicity is making music by, for, and about you. That is a very regressive idea. That is a very asinine idea. That is an idea that, although you can't understand it, it is, although you, the person I'm responding to there directly, although you don't understand it, it's just as bad as, again, the cracker-ass Peckerwood white motherfucker that tries to say that he doesn't want black people listening to his types of music. It's just as bad. It's just that there's no social stigma, there's no widespread social stigma against you planting a flag in the accomplishments of an individual and declaring it to be an accomplishment of an entire group of people, even though the actual accomplishment is solely and entirely the singular individual who actually created it, irrespective of their race. But then anyway, he turns over the mic to a couple of black commentators. And the first one, the first one essentially reiterated a lot of the things he said, but one of the things he had already said, but one of the things he said stuck out to me. He said, I was listening to, I took my buddy's iPod and he had a jazz playlist on there, and the playlist was nothing but white artists. And I was like, hey man, it's one of the most black genres that's ever been created, and there's no black artists on this playlist. That's some racism going on, isn't it? Okay, there is a real perspective problem going on here. Your concept of confronting racism has gone from not being allowed to move into certain neighborhoods, not being allowed to eat at certain restaurants, not being allowed to marry certain races of people, not being allowed to get jobs because of your race, not being allowed to use public facilities because of your race, being lynched because of your race, being lynched for speaking to a woman of a different race. It's gone from that being the daily oppression you face, to you being slightly vexed and annoyed because your white buddy didn't put any black artists in his jazz playlist. Do you not look at this and see a do you not see how hypocritical that sounds? How ungrateful that sounds to the black persons who came before you that actually had to go through real significant shit. I mean, yeah, maybe your buddy is racist or something. Well, I mean, he wants to be friends with you, so I don't know how you could say he's racist, but but now your experience of racism is so petty and minute that you took the time to notice and quantify whether or not there were any black artists in a playlist. That stood out in my mind. He goes to another guy. The second guy starts out seeming a little more reasonable. He says, that he says he's not in favor of getting rid of Led Zeppelin because getting rid of Led Zeppelin is not going to solve the actual problems facing the black community. Yes. Sane, rational, good argument. I totally agree. But then he says something that makes no sense to me. He says he grew up watching VH1 and MTV music documentaries, and he says it was always about white people. He'd watch one about Led Zeppelin, and it was all about Led Zeppelin and white people, and they never acknowledged black and black people. And I'm thinking, okay, first of all, I'm trying to figure out what dimension, in what dimension, philosophical dimension or perspective he's taking to make this statement be true, because it's like, I've watched VH1 documentaries about black artists. I've watched MTV documentaries about black artists. If you keep saying it's always this or always that, I've sat down and watched those same channels, so I don't know what that means. Or is he saying that, like, if a Led Zeppelin documentary comes on, it begins by telling the story from the starting point of Led Zeppelin and not acknowledging all of the black influences leading up to that? Is that what he's trying to say? I'm admitting that I don't know. But I would like to think that there may be some validity to his argument, but I would like to think that if there is validity to that argument, that validity should carry with it an ease of articulation that makes it understandable where he's coming from or what he's getting at. Because otherwise it sounds like he's lying, and I don't think he is. I think he was trying to make an earnest point. But he concludes with a point that is then handed back to the Polyphonic guy, and it concludes with this. It's that rock fans ought to start doing a sort of cultural policing of one another. And the Polyphonic guy even goes so far as to say that it should be like I think he says that rock fans need to hold each other accountable. I'm not watching that video again, so feel free to correct me. Anyway, he says that rock fans that rock fans ought to hold each other accountable about never forgetting the black cultural origins of rock music, and that this is something that, like, okay, I'm gonna stop trying to articulate his point and just move on to the response to that. Okay. Here's the thing. Here's why, and I told you, I'm going to tell you why this is important to me. I suffer from severe depression. I suffer from severe depression. I have experienced, it is a daily grind for me. I'll be real honest with you. My girlfriend and I have not talked for 2 weeks, and it's because I felt a wave of depression coming on, and I did not want to expose her to that. It gets that bad for me. And we just had a 1-hour conversation talking about it. And it gets that bad for me that I just, the line from the Black Sabbath song is true, from Paranoid, finished with my woman because she couldn't help me with my mind. This is something that impacts my relationships. It's that bad. Throughout my life, the thing that has kept me going in all of my depression and all of my pain and all of my misery has been the arts and the imagination and the creativity thereof. There is a beautiful symbiosis that occurs between the person creating the art, the creation of the art, and the appreciation of the art. These two things produce something beautiful, a transcendent exaltation of the human spirit. I know as a creator of music and a creator of literature and recently a creator of paintings, although I think I'm still digital paintings, although I'm still learning at that and I don't call myself a painter yet per se. But as a creative person, I know what it's like to create, where you just rip something out of you. You have to, like, this is why we have art. We have art so that we can express, of all mediums, so that we can express these weird, hard, just intense things inside of us. Things that need articulation. Things that need to be spoken and said, but we can't say. We just have to rip them out of us and hold it up and say, this, look at this, here's my heart, my beating heart, look at that. I need you to look at this. That's what art is. And when you create something and you successfully create something that embodies what you're feeling, good Lord, it is salvation. It is sweet, beautiful, pure salvation. And when you, as an appreciator of the arts, see a piece of art or hear a piece of art or read a piece of art or otherwise consume a piece of art that speaks to you, that you see it and you say, that is transcendental. I'm terrified of the idea of becoming a parent, of having children. So when I saw David Lynch's Eraserhead, I was like, oh my God, it's exactly what I'm feeling. Or I see a woman that is so transcendently beautiful that all I can hear is that beautiful piano melody that Michael Kamen wrote for Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, that became the basis for the song "Everything I Do It for You." These feelings, being able to feel that, being able to experience those transcendental moments of pure artistic realization, that is what gets me through the daily grind of the fucking hell of depression that I have to put up with. And so it hurts me. And the reason I'm pushing this so hard is because I know all of the arguments that could ever possibly be presented. I've read White Fragility. I know that the people who push this woke bullshit perspective have trained themselves to try to put people who disagree with them on the defensive by digging into their minds. I know what that's like, and that is vile and malicious and sadistic, and you should be ashamed for treating people this way, but I am being honest with you. Nothing if not, yes, I'm being vehement. Yes, you're probably a little uncomfortable right now, but I am being honest with you. I am being honest about why I feel this way, because when I am having that transcendental experience as a creator or a consumer of art, one of those two things, that sweet salvation, that one thing that gets me through the doldrums of my days, nothing infuriates me more than some wormy, pencil-dicked little jerk. And I'm sorry to use that language, but I'm just expressing how I feel here. Some little jerk showing up and trying to make me feel bad about having that experience. And that is all you are doing. When you tell me that I need to be held accountable for what? Enjoying Led Zeppelin? How dare you, sir? How dare you take it upon yourself You know, it's funny, Marilyn Manson has been, forgive me, I don't normally do this, but I don't want to do a bunch of cuts. Anyway, Marilyn Manson has this year has had his career upended with these accusations. And it hurts me to say this, but as a hardcore Marilyn Manson fan, I actually do think that those accusations against him are legit. Based on what I've seen presented, I believe it. I believe those accusations. Hurts me to say that. I don't feel like listening to Marilyn Manson right now, personally. But I was scrolling through the comments on one of his videos recently, thinking about this and kind of reflecting on it, and I was scrolling through the comments on one of his music videos on YouTube, and there was a comment from a guy who said that he would never, despite the controversy about this, he would not stop listening to Marilyn Manson because Marilyn Manson's music had saved him from committing suicide. I could never go to that guy and say, hey, you shouldn't listen to this music that stopped you from committing suicide, because I know what that's like. And I know what it's like to have a piece of music that stopped you from committing suicide, because I've had music that stopped me from committing suicide. And how dare you, Polyphonic guy, I don't know your name, how dare you say that I need to be held accountable for listening to a piece of music, purely enjoying a piece of music without bowing my head in subservience and acknowledging the guilt and shame that my people have inflicted on the world. How dare you, sir? And you wonder why people tell you to fuck off with this shit. It's not because you're making reasonable points that people are too bigoted to take seriously. It's because you are making completely unrealistic points, unacceptable, burdensome points that no person should have to put up with or deal with. That guy you interviewed was right. Throwing out Led Zeppelin will not solve the problems facing the black community. But you know what else won't solve the problems facing the black community? White rock and roll fans bowing their heads and acknowledging their guilt and shame for listening to Led Zeppelin. This is not making the world better. This is just mental masturbation for people who are too uptight to kick back and have a good time. I believe it was H.L. Mencken who said that Puritanism is the sinking feeling that somebody somewhere is having a good time. And you, sir, Mr. Polyphonic guy, you're doing exactly that. You're being a Puritan. Rather than being a religious Puritan and admonishing everybody for listening to rock and roll because it's the devil's music and all of that stuff, you're just finding another reason to admonish people for having a good time. And here's the thing. What you're doing is killing rock and roll, because there is a core ethos at the heart of rock and roll. That attitude of two middle fingers in the air, fuck you, I'm going to have a good time. That attitude does not coincide with, let's bow our heads and think about what sinners we are. I mean, as I was listening to you make these asinine arguments, sir, I was imagining David Lee Roth, Diamond Dave, up there at a a Van Halen concert back in the day. Like, Diamond Dave just finishes doing Hot for Teacher, and he's like, all right, Diamond Dave, wants you to stop and acknowledge the fact that this music was unfairly and unjustly taken from a group of people that have been subjugated by our people, and that we should acknowledge our culpability in their ongoing plight. All right, now here's Panama. It doesn't work like that. Yeah, believe it or not, for rock and roll to work, and really any other art form to work, people need to be able to engage with it with a spirit that is unburdened by guilt and shame. Because all you're doing is stifling joy, stifling happiness. There will always be someone in the world that is suffering more than you are. Bill Watterson said it best. The funny thing about life is it's never so bad it can't get worse. There will always be someone who is suffering while you're out having a good time. And what you are doing, you who like so many people in the world have this weird neuroses that makes it impossible for you to enjoy life knowing that other people are suffering in some way. You who think that you enjoying your life has some sort of divine connection to the fact that other people are suffering in theirs. When most of the people who are suffering, you don't know who they are and your actions are not impacting them at all. You who think that we need to be forever shackled and burdened with this stifling Sunday school lesson, with having our knuckles wrapped with the ruler of re-education, all you are doing is making it impossible to enjoy the things we enjoy. And just because you didn't say that that was your motive, just because you paid lip service to an appreciation for these things, does not mean that that's not the effect that you're having. But here's the thing, I'll close saying this. I have a few, as you can gather, I have a few mental health issues that I deal with. One of them is that I'm a high-functioning autistic. And that makes it difficult for me to understand a lot of things. Like, I had trouble with the Bible early on. Like, when kids wanted to pick on me at school, I would let them beat me up and everything because I read the Bible and Jesus said if someone hits you, turn around and let him hit you on the other side. So I thought that, oh gosh, it means that if someone wants to beat you up, you have to let them. I understand now there's more nuance to it than that, to the message than that. But at the time, you have a literal mindset. This is how you see things. So that gets in the way. And I may be too literal in my interpretation of this. I don't know. But one thing I have to deal with is called, I'm OCD, obsessive compulsive, and I have to deal with something called pure O, or purely obsessional OCD. And the thing with pure O is that what happens is it's not about your habitual behaviors or having to do specific actions repeated times, although I've dealt with that in the past. But it's about your mind fixating on things and not being able to change how your mind fixates on something. Other people have the ability to discharge something they don't agree with and be done with it. They hear something like this asinine video and they think, I don't agree with that, I'm done. I don't have that. It locks into me. And so what happens is, because the Polyphonic guy said this, and because there are going to be a bunch of people that stand up and boo anybody who contradicts him, and because, believe it or not, despite my seemingly extroverted nature, I actually am very sensitive to criticism and that sort of thing, what's going to happen is that anytime I see something to do with Led Zeppelin now, this is what I'm going to think about. And I'm not going to be able to enjoy Led Zeppelin anymore. Because, as a human being, I don't feel good about doing things that are hurting other people. And so when you beat me down with some weird religious doctrine about how enjoying Led Zeppelin without having a moment's pause to feel shitty about it beforehand, without doing that, when you beat me down with that, I can't enjoy Led Zeppelin anymore. So, go ahead and tell me Rush is racist and Dream Theater is racist and Steely Dan and The Residents and Nightwish and Halloween and pretty much every other band I like. Just go ahead and tell me that figure out reasons to blame them for racism too, so that I can finally stop caring. Because the thing is, part of the depression I deal with, I don't like forming new attachments now. And it's made it really hard for me to appreciate music and art and media that I enjoy, because I don't want to go out and find new things anymore. Because I'm just going to get told by some asshole like the Polyphonic guy that it's not appropriate for me to enjoy these things anymore. So there's no reason to get attached in the first place. I can finally be done with it and just practice my Zen meditation, which I know it's Zen. Asian people made that up. I shouldn't be doing it. I'll start pausing for a moment of solemn reflection about how wrong I am for finding value in something that somebody else of a different ethnicity from me came up with, because apparently racism is somehow a problem for me, but not you who are coming up, not you, Mr. Polyphonic asshole, who are drawing all of these lines in the sand.